At the game conference last week, I spoke about long-term athlete development. So since I wrote a book in 2006 that incorporated a long-term athlete development plan, I receive a lot of feedback from coaches and get a lot of emails from coaches telling me that the U.S. needs to adopt a Canadian model or to be more like Canada. So I looked a little bit into the Canadian model and looked for the reasons why Bali and Hamilton set out to create a long-term athlete development model. The main reasons why really haven't held up to science. That is, they cited 8 to 12 years or the 10,000 hour rule to become an expert, and then also the windows of opportunity that are based on peak height philosophy, and there's really no substantial science to back up either one. So that kind of, you know, not necessarily negates the value of a long-term athlete development plan, but it certainly questions it. And then I found some other materials on different Canadian sports sites that talked about why we need a long-term athlete development plan, and none of the reasons really fit in the United States, or I just feel that they won't solve the problem in the United States. So one is, we all know that physical education has been cut in children in schools, but I don't know that adopting a long-term athlete development plan will fix that problem. It could, if all the schools and all the national governing bodies, NFHS, NCAA, if everybody got together and kind of forced schools to mandate 4 days of physical education as part of a long-term athlete development plan, then it would have a huge impact. I just don't see that happening. So instead, I think rather than thinking about a long-term athlete development plan and something that a governing body is going to institute throughout its programs, because the U.S. is so big and so many different organizations and so forth, I think instead we need to focus on trying to get parents and coaches to adopt more of a long-term athlete development philosophy. And in some ways the difference between a plan and a philosophy might just be semantics. But I think if we can get coaches to take the long-term view, especially with children, and not treat each season as the end of a player's career. And similarly with parents. If we can get parents to see each season as one season as part of a career or a lifetime of sports activities, as opposed to the end all for that season, I think we can create better environments for youth athletes. So what would a philosophy versus a plan look like? Well, to me, one of the big things that I've taken away from Bali and Hamilton's model is the idea of the peak by Friday mentality. So peak by Friday, when training to win becomes more important than training to improve, then you've created a peak by Friday mentality. Now, at the professional level, that's what we see, because at the professional level, everything is based on results. But we can't carry that same mentality down into youth sports, and I think sometimes we do. And if you look at the behaviors of youth coaches, you tend to see behaviors that are more indicative of an emphasis on winning that game as opposed to long-term development or training to improve. So I think if coaches and parents can look at a youth sports season as one season out of 10 or 12 or 14 or 20 seasons that athlete or child might participate in sports, and think about how that changes how we might approach each practice, each game, I think we can see some positive benefits. So rather than spending all of our time working on a press break, because this week in a tournament we're playing some teams that press, maybe we teach some principles that are going to help that player both in the game this week because they're starting to improve, but also be able to transfer if the player moves to a different team and with a different coach, or the next season with different teammates, different players, different strategies and so on. And when we teach in this way, the learning that goes on in practice can carry forth through to other seasons. Whereas if I'm only focused on my set plays for this season, those might not help the players as they move on to their next season with a different coach, with different strategies. So if we can focus instead on developing simple plays, but really focusing on how can we develop the player, how can we improve their individual skills that relate to a team game. So it's not just about doing some isolated ball handling drills or isolated shooting drills, but how can we incorporate those individuals in a team game that's going to promote development. And then from a parent standpoint, how can we support coaches that have this long-term view, as opposed to simply running to the coach with the best record, because that's what we assume, or that's who we assume will be the best coach, because we're basing things, on won-loss percentage and not taking into account, who the players are on each team, and how the player or how the coach attracted those players, and so forth. So the best coach isn't necessarily the coach with the best won-loss record. Maybe the best coach is the one who's doing a great job developing players and doing such a great job that the elite teams are poaching his players all the time. And so now that coach may not have the same won-loss record, but all of his players are going on and playing at higher levels and playing on more competitive or the perceived more elite teams, because of the preparation that this coach has given them. And so maybe that's where we look at as kind of the best coach, because he's developing the players that are going on to play at higher levels, as opposed to simply taking players who are already developed, and putting them, into competition and winning games. So again, to me, it's more about the philosophy and how we approach the day-to-day, the season, and then the career of a young athlete, as opposed to having some specific plan. Because any plan is going to tend to break down, because every player is so different, and also, there's so many factors that go into talent development that it's impossible to plan for all the different factors and all the different individuals and have one kind of overarching plan. But I think we can have a philosophy that promotes looking at a youth athlete's career as more than just one season, and trying to develop skills that are going to help that player go on and play next season and then into the future.